Tiffany. I am a member here at the church, and then I am also an LPC licensed professional counselor. I have a private practice up in Fort Collins. I got my master's in 2017 and worked with an agency for a while. And then thanks to Brenda's encouragement, actually, I launched a private practice like 3.5 years ago now. So yeah, that is what I do for a living. I see individuals and then couples. This is where conflict management is a bit of a staple in what I am doing throughout my week. Sometimes I sit with teens. There's definitely some conflict management I'm doing that, there with parents. So when I'm walking us through this today, I might have some examples that look more like spouses, family members, kiddos, mother-in-law. Like, I'm kind of going to be working in that family area, but I want you guys also to bring in those other relationships, friendships, housemates, right? These other areas where maybe we notice conflict is arising often. So, any needs at the beginning here before I start? Can everyone hear me okay? Has everybody got enough room? Oh, do you need anything, Aiden?
No.
Okay. Oh, it's a thumbs up. Great, I love it. Okay, so the first part here is actually going to be about friendship. This always feels like the fundamental place to start for me. So when I see a couple, this is quite often the sense I'm working in this, I'm asking them, are they best friends? What does that feel like? Did they have a point where they were best friends, right? When you're talking about a housemate, right? How close were you before you started living together? How did that maybe get interrupted when you started sharing a space? What does friendship look like? So John Gottman talks about how friendship offers the best protection against feeling adversarial toward your spouse, your children, parents, friends, coworkers. So this is almost, if you can think about it, it's like a buffer. This is always the place we should be having conflict out of. So it sounds maybe like a bit much to think I'm supposed to be friends with everyone, so I'll get to that. Because we definitely know what it feels like when we've got that chemistry in a friendship versus maybe more of an acquaintanceship, right? We can kind of feel those differences, so we'll talk through that. Another quote I put up here at the beginning, the mark of friendship is not that help will be given when the pinch comes, of course it will, but that having been given, it makes no difference at all, with C.S. Lewis. So that's another sense that there's a friendship there, right? That we don't feel quite the same way about asking of a favor of a friend who knows us and cares about us, and maybe there's this flow, kind of a give and take. Right? I've got one more friendship quote just to kind of establish what we're talking about. I love this quote. This is also just kind of considering that not all of our friendships were chosen by us in our egotistical pride of like, I choose good people, right? Some of it is actually God. God is working in our lives and putting people in our lives. And when we have conflict, God's actually at work. And so we have to try to see conflict as something that God is possibly inviting us into. And that could be to set a boundary, but still to engage in and to consider for ourselves, what is God doing here in it? So this one says, we think we've chosen our peers. In reality, a few years difference in the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, choice of one university instead of another, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at a first meeting. Any of these chances might have kept us apart. But for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," can truly say to every group of Christian friends, "You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." The friendship is not a reward of our discriminating and good taste in finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each of us the needs of others. So this is a really good thing to consider when conflict comes up. What is God doing in this, right? For my benefit, for their benefit, for our salvation, right? How is this God at work? It's just a good reminder. So I wanted to just kind of put that to you guys. What does friendship feel like? Healthy friendship. Anything come to mind? Yeah.
Fun.
Fun, yes. Fun. A little bit of like the let your hair down feeling? Yes.
Silence is okay.
Yes.
Say it again.
Relax.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Silence is okay. Oh, right. Sorry, I've got a recording. Well, that's reminding me. Yeah, anything else? Anything else that comes to mind when you think of a good friendship? Yes.
Loyalty.
Loyalty, yes. Yeah, someone's in your corner, right? Even when things are looking a little, uncertain, there's someone in your corner. Yeah.
Safety.
Safety, yes. Yeah. Speaking like physical safety, emotional safety, all the safeties.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Someone you feel safe with. Yeah.
Wanting to give without receiving.
Yes. Yeah. There's a desire, right? There's actually a desire. Oh, wanting to give without receiving. Yes, that was the question. I'm sorry, I don't do this enough. Yeah. So wanting that desire to just want to serve another person, that can be felt in friendship. That's really good. Anything else? Anything else that comes to mind? Yes.
Healthy conflict.
Yes, healthy conflict should be felt in friendships. Yes, you actually feel like you can bring and engage in conflict with that person and it's gonna be okay, right? That would be a healthy friendship. Yeah.
Willingness to listen.
Yes, that's a very good one. Willingness to listen. Willingness to listen is really important, right? So in some of these examples I have, I will say maybe I cheated a little because, the opposing party in the example is actually willing to listen. And that's not always the case, right? So we'll have to talk about that as well. What does that look like when that's not happening, right? When that's not there. Okay, so I wrote down some things that I had thought of. Genuine enjoyment of each other, the fun, missing them. I love that. Do you get a new friend and it's been a couple weeks since you had that first kind of dinner together or that first encounter, and a few weeks go by and you're like, I miss them. Like that did something to me. I want to see them again, right? There's such a beautiful feeling when we miss someone. I think it can be a really beautiful way to remind us of what they bring, right? Giggling is something they find funny. They're not even around, right? But you kind of go, oh my gosh, they would have loved that, right? Like I'm gonna have to figure out how to retell that. I love this one. So making an effort to update the love map. If anyone knows John Gottman, the love map essentially is kind of your world, the world of a person. So if you think about, with a good friend, when you call, it's very typical to say, how are you? How did that situation with your coworker turn out? What happened that day with your friend when you were going to go to lunch, right? We check in with each other and we ask questions that show that we know the other person because we're actually asking questions that are in context of their world, right? This is also why it's so hard with our kids to stay connected because their love map is changing all the time. Who's your best friend today? Okay, your teacher for this year. Oh, your 7 teachers for this year, right? It's like trying to engage and plug into their love map can be a challenge, and we feel it. It's like, okay, your favorite color's not green, now it's blue. Okay, everything now must be blue, So does anyone kind of get the idea of what a love map is? It's really just plugging into another person's world and caring enough to remember. Remembering can be hard. Taking notes, even if we need to, and admitting the humility of like, I have a really hard time remembering names or dates, or it's like, okay, that's okay. But the effort there, right? I think this with the loyalty, right? This idea of staying open and honest is a part of that, right? The honesty that we can trust each other, that's what it's in. Mutual sense of unconditional regard, hearts are for each other. So that's another big one. When I sit with a couple, I'm first checking in. Do you feel like the other person's heart is for you, and vice versa? Right? Does it feel like their heart is for you? Because if it doesn't, if it feels like they're malicious towards you, if it feels like they want to see you fall, that's where we start. That's the problem, right? So if in a friendship, in any kind of relationship, it feels like they're out to get you in some kind of way, that's not good. Like we want to start there and we want to have an open, honest conversation about what that's feeling like. Really good job, you guys. All right, let's see here. Okay, so this is where I kind of like to address being friends with everyone. That sounds impossible, sounds exhausting. And it's also, I think not quite realistic in the sense of intimacy with every single person we ever meet, right? So we'll talk through the reality of what these levels of intimacy can look like. I'm going to read this one first, this verse here, because when I talk about love, this is always what I mean. Everyone out there in the world talks about love, and not everyone knows what they're meaning, when they talk about it. What I love about the Christian faith is it's so simple. It's right in front. It's not simple to enact all the time, but it is so simple that there is a definition. It's like a Webster's dictionary. You pull it up. It's right here. So when you don't know if you're loving your kids, or you don't know if you're loving your spouse, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not arrogant or rude. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. I mean, these are crazy standards, right? These are good standards, though. This is the Orthodox way, right? These standards that feel out of reach, but they're incredibly beautiful to pursue and to keep our eyes on, right? It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, love never ends. So I wanted to start with this one at the bottom, because that is also fundamental in our discussion, that we're all on the same page when we talk about loving each other, right, in friendship. This next one, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God forgave you, right? That's another call for us towards a tender heart and forgiveness. And then you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbors, love, patient, kind, right? Think about your neighbors, the people that you engage with, and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, be patient, kind, right? Not irritable. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. So this is kind of the lens at which we're coming through conflict. I wanted to establish this. This is not surprising to anyone, I'm sure. This is something you guys have all, at some point recognized, right? The church is offering a pursuit in this way to pursue love and these actions. But it's so critical not to forget it when conflict gets high. Okay. So one of the first things Father Evan said that stood out to me when I started visiting here, he turned to me one day, he was walking past me in a flurry of doing something else, and he goes, "Don't you love people? They're so wonderful." And I was like, "Oh, that's a funny joke. Like, what?" And he's like, "They're just so wonderful." And he just keeps going. And I'm like, what? It kind of just blew my mind. Because I knew after I thought about it for like 5 seconds that he was being earnest. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, he really meant that, and he works with people all the time, and I'm a counselor, so I think maybe he was just kind of throwing that out there to another like, oh, isn't this fun, and I'm like, what? No, like, this is hard, and people make things more complicated, and I'll never forget it, because that, to me, was a fundamental way of living that Father Evan engages in, that says man is inherently good. And I had come out of this place of man is inherently evil. And I saw it then when I was visiting, and I went, that's it. That's why I'm here. Because he pursues every single person like they are inherently God's creation, that they're good, right? And he doesn't get perfect all the time, he's a person too. But he has been such a good role model in that way, right? So I think when we think about this Christian call, and love forgiveness vespers, because we venerate one another almost in a sense, right? We actually kiss, and we can even, oh my gosh, this. What can't you say the word? Thank you, yes. So we do that though with one another in asking for forgiveness. And that service is when it dawned on me, this person in front of me should be treated with the care that I treat icons, right? Like, they have inherent image of God. They're a God-bearing image, right? And that they're an icon, a little icon, in that sense, right? And I knew this in some regard, right? We know this, but I think the icons can help us so much recognize how to tangibly engage with another person in treating them the way that we would care for our altar. Okay, so we're going to get into part 2 here. I put a couple funnies up just because I thought they were funny. Just a couple examples of where conflict can go when we don't feel like we're being heard. I just love the passive aggressiveness of that forehead one got to me. I just thought it was hilarious. So he makes her forehead a little bit bigger when he's upset with her and puts a photo out. It's just so subtle, but it's so cruel. So we're going to go into conflict, but I want us to always keep in mind the friendship piece, okay? What is the purpose of conflict? hint, we see forgiveness vespers, yeah, in that service there. So that's where we're going with this, right? Conflict has a purpose, but we're always keeping forgiveness there. I came up with this on my own, so we'll see how it lands with you guys today. This is what I want you to remember. If you forget everything else, the purpose of conflict is to protect the relationship, not your ego. So when you're considering engaging in conflict, is it going to be productive and helpful in reconciling the relationship in some way? Even if that's establishing a boundary, we're going to talk about boundaries, because boundaries are important. But this is actually a big part of conflict management, is recognizing if I should even engage. Because if it's about my ego, I just need to step back and check first, right? If there's a purpose in the relationship as to why I need to enter in and talk about something that's upsetting me, or that has been, upsetting, then that's when I need to be going in. So I kind of expand on this. Engaging in conflict is the right choice when we seek to remove a wedge of bitterness and resentment that might fester in the relationship, right? So if we're sensing, okay, this keeps coming up, this is frustrating, it's probably productive for me to engage and let this person know, because if I don't, it's gonna start to fester. And that's actually gonna cause space, right? Because I'm gonna kind of go, yeah, I don't need to make eye contact with them, it's fine, I'm gonna start to pull back a little bit if that wedge stays there, if I'm still feeling frustrated, I'm feeling offended. So the purpose to engage is to get rid of that wedge. It's the wrong choice when it's gonna feed that wedge. So and I'm sure, we've all participated in this kind of conflict, me included. The conflict that continues to escalate, right? Like, well, I did it last week. Yeah, I know, I'll get on it. Yeah, you always say that. What the heck, right? It's this escalating thing that's continuing to build that wedge and make things feel bigger. That's the kind of conflict we want to flag very quickly, and we want to step back and recognize, this isn't productive right now, right? So we need to take a break. This isn't healthy conflict. This is me wanting to be heard. There's a need there that's definitely needs to be met, but me yelling and us escalating and maybe getting into name calling, that's not going to help my core need here. So, any questions around any of this so far? We're gonna keep getting into it. We're gonna get into boundaries. Yeah.
Is there a good point when to decipher when engaging would be like a wrong thing or a right thing? Because the other person, it might be a wrong thing for them, but a right thing for me, per se.
Yeah. I think, part of what we want to do is recognize, I think that I land on this a lot, is this going to be productive? It's good to consider where the other person's at.
Okay.
What you're saying, right?
Right.
If they're in a headspace or they're in a place emotionally and you just don't feel like they're going to hear you, how you're trying to talk to them, you feel like they're gonna hear it the wrong way. And some of this we have to kind of know them, right? To know them enough to kind of go, you know what? I don't think they're in a place for this conversation. But what does that look like to do the work for myself? And what does that look like to still pursue them and engage with them? And what do I need there to be? Go ahead, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay, it's built back and forth.
Well then, would a good way to approach that would be to ask that, have that person take the first step, ask them to take the first step about whatever the argument or conflict is?
I think if you're both aware that there's a conflict, if you're both aware that it's happening, because not always are both parties aware that there's a wedge, right? If both parties are aware, I think as Christians, I feel like we're called to engage out of a place of humility, coming into the conversation, asking for forgiveness for our part.
Right.
So that's going to soften the startup, right? And we'll talk a little bit about kind of this smaller area of abusive relationships where that can get really taken advantage of. But for the most part, what I would really encourage people, come up with 3 things if you can, 3 things that you did to contribute to it escalating before you guys took a break. Just to come in humility and say, I need to have a conversation with you, I need to ask you for your forgiveness. And it's really humbling, and it's hard, especially if you don't feel like you're the one who did most of the, you did the work to
Right.
make it what it is, but it's really good for you. It's so good for you to come at it that way. Yeah, does that help?
Yes.
Kind of thinking through
Thank
that? Yeah. So healthy conflict is the need to address where trust, love, or respect has been broken in hopes of keeping that person close, keeping that intimacy. Right, so this next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit of this circle that Father Evan, some of you might have heard this from Father Evan, I totally stole it, so all checks to him. He has this circle where love, trust, and respect is at the center. We're going to talk about that. When we address conflict, it's likely what we're trying to do is reconcile and bring that person back into unity with that love, trust, and respect. That's the goal, the hope, is to keep that intimacy. Good relationships have conflict, but they also have true repentance and the hard work of reconciliation. So that's where I feel like as Christians we're led to lead that, even if it feels like, well, they're really the problem here, right? We're still called to lead that, right? That's really important. So here's this piece that is totally from Father Evan, but I love it so much, and he knows that I use it all the time in my counseling sessions. What we're looking at here is identifying the people in your world, in your life, where they currently are on this, right? And if you think about these rings of a tree, we've got some people in that most center place, maybe some people a boundary out, maybe trust was broken a few times, and it's like, okay, can't really trust them because every time maybe I bring this to them, they slander me, they tear me down. I'm not sure, that's just an example of what that might look like, where that emotional trust gets broken and it's like, okay, I need to put them back out of that circle a little bit. So what I do with my clients is I really do, and you guys can do this if you'd like in your notes, I have them draw this circle out and kind of place where their people are in it currently, where they would like them to be. Sometimes someone's pushing to be in that middle circle, but they haven't earned it. Maybe they've repeatedly broken trust or been disrespectful. And they're currently in that, and you're like, I'd like them to be about 2 rings out because this hurts a lot for them to try to stay here, right? And vice versa. Maybe you recognize someone's a little further out because of something that happened a couple years ago, and it's like, man, I never did the work to reconcile that. I want to bring them back in and have more intimacy with them again. So does this general concept of boundaries and the structure we're using today make sense? Yeah.
So having like somebody in your inner circle that you're like, I'm not like, how would you suggest setting those boundaries and like having that conversation and like, but doing that in a way that still is healthy for you and the other person?
Yes. This is the crux of it all. It's probably why you're all here. Setting boundaries is so hard because usually the party who's receiving the boundary will take offense. And that's very, very difficult to have to say, I'm going to set this boundary even though I'm going to upset this person. And my intent to set the boundary is not to upset them, make them angry. My intent is to have proper, healthy relationship with them, but it might not be received that way. So we're going to get into that. Is that okay? This next slide, I break it down a little bit too. When we recognize that someone might not be capable, this is kind of how Father Evan will say it, he says someone might not be capable of living in this center ring, it's actually honoring them to recognize in what capacity they can be a capable friend. Because you're meeting them, you're going out into this place and going, I don't respect you right now, I don't trust you right now, but I love you. I'm going to still engage with you in love, and I'm going to meet you where you are capable of excelling as a friend. And that might look like not calling them every day, but once every week. That might look, it might look like some tangible actions for a little bit more space. But to pursue them and to say, I still love you and I want to engage, but you're not capable of being in this place without kind of destroying the house, so to speak, throwing the furniture everywhere. And, if you can't live there, where can I meet you that says, look at you flourish there as my friend. You can do this piece really well, and I can be in this space with you. Does that kind of make sense to reframe that, to think about a loving way to put them in this boundary. And you don't always have to say it either. This is would it be productive to tell them you're 3 rings out from love, trust, and respect, but I'm gonna call you every other Wednesday? Like, that's probably not the most loving way, right, to like share this information, right? So we're never ever doing this to spite someone. You really gotta check your heart. Check your heart with boundaries. We never want to do this to spite someone. We're not looking to do this to get back at them, to cut them off from their grandkids. None of that ever, right? What we are trying to do is love them better. And when there's increased conflict because they demand to be in that middle intimate space, and they keep breaking your trust, they keep losing your respect, they don't love you very well, they're mean to you, it's actually very loving to go, how can I engage with them just a few steps out? Go ahead, that's okay, yeah, you're okay.
What if I am the person that's pushing?
Yes, let me get to that. That is, I think, the next slide.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sometimes a boundary that's set by one party feels like unresolved conflict to the other party. So if you're the one receiving this boundary, and you haven't had it spelled out for you, no one's coming to you going, you're 3 circles out, no one's doing that, but you feel it. They've stopped calling you as often, they maybe avoid your eye contact a little bit, and it hurts. It doesn't feel good. And you don't always know why, right? Because they maybe haven't said it. Sometimes it's worth a clarifying conversation to go, hey, I just want to check in with you. Are we okay? Is everything okay? Right? If they're able to talk to you about what's going on and, hey, I just need some space right now. Things have been hard in my personal life. Respect the answer they give you, right? If they say, you said this to so-and-so about me and it wasn't true, and well, then that needs to be resolved, because maybe I did say it and I need to apologize, or maybe I didn't say it and there's a miscommunication happening, right? So sometimes a conversation can resolve some of that, right, if we get back on the same page. What's hard is 2 parties are always involved and we can only control ourselves, right? So if we sense that we're kind of being, I don't want to say pushed out, but we're kind of being held back a little bit from someone's most intimate space, sometimes they're not even aware they're doing it, because they got busy and 3 kids are vomiting and they're not making your eye contact because they're brainstorming crisis scenarios in their head. Sometimes people are just disconnected in that sense, and we're thinking we've done something wrong. And that's not the case at all. So the conversation to kind of clarify can be helpful. If you think this is just using your best judgment, it would be productive. Now, if someone's kind of putting you at a distance, not talking to you as much, not filling you in as much on their love map, that kind of stuff, and you get a sense that it's just not a good time, and this is a little bit of trust in your gut, If you get a sense, you know what, I think this would end in a big blast of a fight, I'm just going to respect this right now and honor the boundary. And I'm going to continue to engage with them in the ways they let me. I'm going to continue to love on them, right? So it can be both things can be a possible choice there. There's so much nuance, right? Like when I sit with one individual, we're like getting into what that actual context of that individual thing is. So some of this is building up your ability to trust your gut with some of this, and make sure you're surrounded by people who are operating in ways like this that can help you. When you think about, how do I respond lovingly? Do you have friends in your support system who give you really good feedback that way, right? Like, my dad is doing this thing again. I really want to be loving and not be angry. How do I do this well? Do you have friends in your circle that you can rely on to not gossip, but confide in when you really do need discernment and wisdom, right? The intent for that conversation is, I need to do the most loving thing possible here, right? That's a little bit of what that can look like to navigate that.
Because sometimes the person that set the boundary doesn't like conflict.
Yes.
That they know,
Yes.
that, but that they don't. They've pushed you out because they don't want the conflict. They're not good at it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But sometimes that person may just not want to be as close to you as you want to be to them.
Yes, yeah, and that's
That's
the
hard to deal. That's hard to deal with,
Yeah.
you know. But
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. It is very hard to be on the receiving end of this and to handle it in love. You know, it's a difficult thing. You're gonna share too.
Yeah, I wanted to set a couple of foundational things first, and then I kind of had a question about why we were approaching it and the way that we approached it.
Yeah.
I take it as kind of a standard from, not just from this talk, but from that therapists talk about how you're not supposed to say you, you're supposed to say I am this way.
Yeah.
So that's point one. The second thing is, you said, I'm the only one I can do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that we've been framing it is, this other person is incapable of X, so therefore they must be out there. Like what you didn't say was, I can't do X, therefore that person must be out there.
Sure.
Well, I'm curious about that, because
Yeah.
like, we say that it's not us interpreting them, but then we say, oh, well, that person's not good at something, so I need to keep them in 3 rings out.
Sure.
So can you explain the structure of that and why we approached it as a problem with the other person instead of a problem with us?
And I think, you know, I'm definitely going to keep going into this. I think some of that is that extreme ownership of saying, whatever's going on with them, I'm not capable of handling it well in a way that they're...
Or even just don't want to. I don't even mean that we are necessarily wrong either.
Yeah.
But, like, if you want us to think in terms of our abilities and our responsibilities,
Sure.
and it seemed odd that all of our focus was, well, that person's not trustworthy. That's not for me to say. I mean, it is, insofar as I want X level of trust, and that this isn't matching that.
Sure. And I think where we need to be, like, walking this line is that we are allowed to have experiences of how people treat us, right? We're allowed to have those experiences, and we're allowed to make decisions, right, that feel wise for our own health and for the relationship, right? And I think it's totally valid to point that out, what you just pointed out, that we do need to keep our eyes on ourselves, right, and what we're doing. And it might be in this conversation we're having, talking about how hard it is to receive a boundary. Be very, very, very careful when you decide you need a boundary, because we don't take them lightly, and they're very, very hard to be on the receiving end of, right? And so in whatever way we can to reconcile, right, and bring that love, trust, and respect back. And it starts with us asking for forgiveness for what we did, right? So that's the part I did bring up, right, is that if there is a break in that most intimate circle, the first thing we should do as Christians is, if we're going to engage in the conflict, is bring up, I need to have a conversation with you about me asking you for forgiveness. Do you hear that? So that's the ownership piece, right? Now you come in and you own your part, and someone receives that, right? And they go, good, it was your fault anyway. The whole thing was your fault, right? As a Christian, we're going to own what we did, but I also think there's a discernment there to recognize if they're not willing to engage in reconciliation, if we're talking about a dynamic.
Our decision would still be based on where we stand in relation to that, right? Wouldn't we still not be saying, we can understand, we can understand and know that they're incorrect, right? But then our decision would still be framed and moving out from, well, I don't want to interact at this level with that.
Yes.
I don't want to interact.
Sure. Keeping the I statement. Yes. Yeah. Because I know, Father Evan will bring up things about, like, if one person has an affair on the other person, the person who that affair was done to, they have every right to leave, right? So we have to recognize we can make choices to create maybe more distance and not have as much intimacy with the person Is that okay? I do hear though the I statement of keeping it on yourself, and I think that's good. Because it is easy for us in the concept of boundaries or in this discussion, we can decide we're the ultimate judge of things. And that's where we do need to keep that what is God doing in this part, right? And that's where we started with that. Like, what is God doing in this? Where's the reconciliation? How do I approach this from a place of love and asking for forgiveness first for my peace, right? Yeah. Let's see here. Yes. So this basically is what we've been talking about, right? Having patience and grace and endurance. If we feel like we've been set in a different boundary, we feel like we've been cut off a little bit, for us to have patience and curiosity, right? But we're hoping for real work by both parties for reconciliation, to come back to that middle. So let's see, I'm gonna get into this just briefly. Okay, so Regina has a 9-month-old baby, has been feeling like her mother Jane doesn't trust her to be a good mom. So she's already feeling something from her mom that might not be there, right off the bat. But she's getting a sense that she feels something. Regina recently started back at work. Her little one has started at a daycare. Mom lives in a different state, so she's not close by to watch the baby. Mom has been making comments over the last few months that are very disapproving of the baby going to daycare. So this is just setting up a little bit of an example. Gina loves her mom, respects her. She wants her mom's feedback, but she's confident in her decision for her family. So should she keep her feelings to herself or let her mom know what she's feeling? So this is where we're talking about, do I engage, right? Do I continue to feel what I'm feeling? I feel like my mom doesn't trust me. She makes these comments. Do I just let it go, or do I engage? Part of that depends on the relationship that's already established. Like, if you feel like engaging in it would be productive and mom can hear what you have to say, it's, that's the example we'll go kind of jump into. Regina decides to bring up the tension she's feeling. Her mom admits she's critical of Regina's choices. Does Regina trust other people with the baby? Jane didn't really have others watch her children. Jane also admits she's been feeling jealous of strangers who get to hold her grandchild. So this is bringing out that her mom has a bunch of feelings about it too, right? And so they're engaging in a conflict in a way that both of them are able to share some negative emotions, right? That they both had, that they were assuming were correct, but they're actually having the conversation and recognizing, right, that some of them are correct. She's been feeling like she's not a good enough grandmother, worries the baby won't know her. So Jane assures us, the grandmother, Regina, that she is a trustworthy mother, and Regina assures her mom that she's a wonderful grandmother. Regina and Jane both recognize that two things are going on in this tension. Their worldviews are very different around trusting other people, and both of them are sad that they don't live closer. Right? So they're both willing, with different degrees, to let others in to watch the baby, right? And then at this other part here, Jane will always be more cautious. Regina will likely take some leaps of faith that make her mom nervous, Jane makes a point to acknowledge that it's Regina's time to mother. She wants to make a better effort to trust Regina's instinct, even if it doesn't feel like the choice she would have made. So there's this ability for them to both recognize they were feeling big negative emotions, and they were perceiving that the other person had, negative feelings about them. So this is an example of healthy conflict when both parties can share the I statements, right? Share how they're feeling. I feel this way, and I'm not really sure if that's true, but this is how I keep feeling when we talk, right? And the other person can say, just like this example, Jane says, well, I recognize I don't trust the people who are watching your baby, and some of that's okay. It's like, grandma's not gonna trust everybody, and that's okay. And but also just recognizing that they can come together and they can build each other back up of how they see each other. That's so important, right? They're both able to come together and go, I think you're a wonderful grandmother, and I'm sad that you're not closer, but you don't need to feel guilty about it, right? And for the grandmother to say, I think you're an amazing mom, and I'm sad that you don't get as much time with the baby as I want you to have with the baby. Maybe they're putting things in there. But they get to talk and recognize where there's emotions that are big that can kind of be brought back down. I've got one more example. Cynthia and John are married with 3 kids under 10. So some of you might already know how some of this goes. Cynthia keeps trying to get involved with a knitting group that meets every other week in the evenings. John gets frustrated every time she brings up the group. She's made a few meetings, but most of the time the two end up in a fight as she's walking out the door. She knows that John loves her, but she feels like that he's resentful for her going out and leaving. She starts to feel depressed over the next 6 months as they continue to fight. So she keeps trying to do this thing, and they get into big fights, and they don't know why. So here's an example, kind of how we can work that out in a healthy way. Cynthia lets her husband know that she's going to stop meeting with the knitting group until they can figure out, why is this an issue? Why are we blowing up, right? The boundary is that the goal is for her to be able to go, but in peace, right? I'm still gonna do this, but let's pause because we need to figure out why this is such a point of contention, right? Because I care about you, I care about the marriage, and we need to work this out before I continue. Knowing that the end goal is, I'm gonna do this knitting thing, because this is my thing, right? John feels guilty that she isn't gonna go, but he also feels relief. Tells her he wants her to have time with her friends. After working 10 hours a day, he feels uncared for, immediately having the weight of dinner and bedtime with the kids on his own. So he's working long days, coming home and jumping right in, right? He's very available to her and the kids. He realizes that in general, he doesn't feel very cared for. So he's saying, I don't feel very cared for. He works long hours. When he comes home, he jumps right into helping with food, the kids. They haven't had a date night in months, he's saying. He says he doesn't get alone time. He's jealous that she's going out. And then he doesn't have a friend group that meets regularly like that. She's been jealous of his time out. She's been seeing that work as like, oh, look at him, he gets to go off to work and, drive a car without 3 kids, yelling at him in the back. So she's been perceiving his work day a little bit as like a break, right? And so she's got to recognize that. It says, Cynthia and John agree they both need time with friends as well as alone time and date nights. So they start with something simple. Periodic alone time, just 30 minutes on the front porch, reading a book with headphones on. So that was just a simple start. How can we do this like today? What does that look like? Just a very simple honoring of what we're realizing here, which is that neither of us are getting any alone time, any time with friends. Cynthia starts to go to her knitting group again, and John lets her go in peace, feeling cared for, that his group of friends are going to plan to meet next week. So the root issue, right, is that they both needed to communicate better some of those needs outside of being caregivers, because they're both full-time caregivers. And they needed to communicate that some of their needs weren't being met, right? And she's attempting, her attempt to have that need met is to try to go to this group, right? And so that's where that was like hidden for that point of contention. But they both actually need to step out and have some of that. So that was just some exampling of how we can kind of come together, express feelings of how something's making us feel, listen to each other, have a game plan for how to make this feel better, and honor both parties, what they need. This other piece is a bit of kind of more those chronic disagreements, like things that John Gottman calls gridlock. So every time you go to engage in it, it feels like it escalates. It feels like this is off limits. We just don't do this, right? That's kind of a bit of what that gridlock will feel like for you. You feel more frustrated and hurt after trying to bring it up. So I took the same examples and I kind of showed what the gridlock thing is, although I'm sure most of us are familiar. So Regina does not bring up the tension that she's feeling. She continues to feel that her mom disapproves of her, sees her as untrustworthy. She reaches out to her mom less often, right? So she's holding on to these assumptions that mom doesn't see her as a trustworthy mom. She's assuming these things, and then she starts to act on those assumptions. She starts to call her mom less. She doesn't really want to update her on the baby. She's avoiding her mom's calls. She kind of is cautious when they talk and shares very little detail. Her mom, Jane, notices the distance and is hurt by it. She feels like her daughter is too busy for their phone calls since starting back at work, and she believes more firmly that her daughter made a bad decision. So her mom's perspective is of like, you never call anymore, you're too busy, work was a bad choice, you're probably, this is too much for you. So they're both making these assumptions about the other one, right? She also feels maybe her daughter is mad at her for living far away. Again, that guilt comes up, and she goes, she's not calling me because she's mad, because I'm never there, because she needs my help and I can't get it, right? So they're assuming these things. Both parties are quick to get defensive whenever Regina's job or the baby's daycare situation is brought up. They start to resent that the other one is pushing. Regina is pushing her mom out. Regina is pushing to get in. They start to both avoid the phone, and updates become more surface level. So that just kind of can show where that wedge can grow, right? We didn't have the discussion we needed to have, and now we're kind of filling the gap, right? This wedge that gets created, we start to dump assumptions into it about maybe what the other party thinks or feels about us, right? And then they can vice versa think we're thinking and feeling things about them because we're not communicating what's actually going on. This was another one. Cynthia stops going to knitting, never brings it up. John notices Cynthia stops, and he feels relief, but he's too afraid to ask her about it because he doesn't want her to go. And he's just like, cool, she stopped going. We're done. We're not gonna like fight about it anymore, right? She feels resentful. John feels guilty that he fought with her so often, right? So of course he feels bad, but he doesn't know how else to resolve that. He sees that she's withdrawn from him after that. They both have negative emotions around the situation, but they don't have the conversation. The pattern continues. One of them tries to engage in something outside of the home, and the other one makes them feel guilty for it, shuts it down. They both start to feel resentful of the other. Malicious comebacks. They can start to fight dirty. They start to see their married life and their parenting years as a cage, keeping them from fun and the things they enjoy. So they start to get bitter about the parenting years, about, you know, this whole thing that's keeping me back from doing the things I want. So these are just kind of, if we took those healthy relationship examples and kind of put some of this gridlock feeling of like, well, we just don't talk about that situation, and how it can kind of create a wedge. So in chronic conflict, with those examples of chronic conflict, what I'll typically talk about with people is like a negative belief or maybe a core need that we're actually needing from another person or from ourselves, that something's just not being met. So I know we don't have that much time left, so I'm gonna kind of get into this. If you guys have heard of the book The Mountain Is You, it is one of my favorites. It's about self-sabotage, and it is very much so about putting everything kind of back on you, like what can I do to grow and to, you know, change things for the better. The author talks about subconscious commitments. So, you know, I'll give an example of this later on a slide, but a subconscious commitment is something that you're like committed to, maybe in this relationship with this person, that goes pretty deep as far as, you know, what you're actually needing from them. So with the examples, let me see, I might kind of go to it. So like with Regina, she has a core commitment. She wants her mother's approval. She wants her mom to say, you're doing great. You're making good life choices. I'm not worried about any of those life choices. I think everything is great down to every day, right? She's kind of yearning for that. But what she's actually needing is to just settle into her own choices and herself, and not be so caught up in the need for someone else to give that stamp. To just go, okay, I know that this is good for our family. My husband and I have talked about this. We know this is what we want. We want our kids to be able to be in this program. We've thought these things through, and we're okay with this. And if my mom is upset by it, that's okay, but it doesn't need to ruffle my feathers the same way, right? Like, it doesn't need to get to me in that way that creates really intense emotion. So I'm gonna go back. Let's see if I can go back. Okay, so the subconscious commitment, what she'll talk about, the author, is, you know, if you're seeking approval from mom, realizing you need to settle and just know you're approving of yourself and the people in your circle, right? Like your husband, right? It's not in isolation, of course. But you have community around you, and you can be okay with the decisions that you made and not be constantly worried that, you know, my decisions aren't the exact decisions that this person would make. It's okay that we would make different decisions. And to actually be able to live in that. So to be like, we'd make different decisions and that's okay. No one needs to be offended by it or worried by it, right? So the subconscious commitment is the thing that you're pursuing, that desire, and then that core need is the thing you actually need. So some examples of that: core commitment is to be in control, core need is to trust. So if, you know, you're constantly trying to control everything, you want to be in control of everything, so you identify with that of like, ooh, yeah, I'm a micromanager, I love to know everything is, you know, in my personal life, it's all going really, really spot on exactly how I need it. It's actually this core need to have trust to let things go, to trust, right? It's like, I actually need to trust the people around me. I need a support system. I need to feel supported and feel trust that, hey, I don't need to micromanage everything. What I need is to trust that things are going to be okay and that other people are capable too, not just me, right? Another one, approval from others. As the core commitment, core need, approval for yourself. Again, this is just more of a settling. This isn't, I don't want it to be in this isolated space of like, well, everything I say is right and everything they say is wrong. That's not what I mean by approval of yourself. I just mean that you can say, all right, I've weighed the pros and cons. This is the decision I want to make, and I feel like it's good for my family. I've talked to my, spiritual father, my priest. I've talked to my husband, maybe a couple close moms who are in my situation. I feel good about this. This person who I care a lot about still disagrees, and it's okay, right? That's the kind of thing I mean with approval of self. It's not this isolated, like, whatever I want to do is the right thing. Like, please don't hear that. It's okay that we make our choices that are different, from some of our family members and loved ones. If your core commitment is to be free, so that can look like, you keep being late for work, you keep turning down job opportunities. It can look a little bit of that. That's how she'll talk about it in the self-sabotage sense, right? But there's actually this core commitment of like freedom, like don't pin me down, It's like I'm gonna be late for everything because I don't want to be at anything. It's like we're pursuing this desire to just be free and not be pinned down by things. But what we actually probably need is a proper sense of autonomy. And so digging into that core need of like, what does that look like? What does that mean? Like maybe I feel I'm enmeshed with certain people in my life, or I'm not making decisions, in some independence, autonomy. So those are just some examples, and that's kind of the thing that I like to get into in counseling, right, is recognizing what are we pursuing here in these gridlock conflicts. This is really in the context of the gridlock conflicts, right, where they just keep getting hashed out and we keep escalating and we keep not feeling good about it. There's usually something there that one or both parties are looking for that we're not finding in the conflict itself. We're not getting to it. So then the other example, John's core commitment is to be needed, right? So he's devoted, he's a caregiver, 10-hour days, comes home right on dinner, helping with bedtime. He's committed to being needed, and he's really good at showing up and being a caregiver, which is good, but we're recognizing the core need is that he wants to just know he's wanted. Like, to be needed by someone versus to just someone want you around because you're enjoyable to be around, right? Like, I think that's where, he's always helpful, he works hard for his family, he doesn't often complain versus being needed in every situation. Again, those are good, those can be good strengths to have. We're not saying all of this, so you don't throw that all out, right? Not all of that gets thrown out. But realizing in the conversation, he wants to know that Cynthia wants him. He wants to be pursued as a friend and a lover, not just a caretaker and a financial support, right? So they're recognizing that there's a core need of, I just want to know that I'm wanted too. Here, that we enjoy each other, and I enjoy my kids, and we laugh and have a good time. And so does that kind of make sense? This gets kind of into like where, again, I'd be doing more context around what the person's bringing to me, and we're talking this through. But I do think this book is really helpful that kind of lays that out. And Lynette.
So I'm thinking there's a point where you can do this yourself, but there's a point where you're going to need to come to someone like you.
Sure, yeah. And that's the thing too, is I think recognize your support system and who you have in your circle that knows you really, really well. I think sometimes the answer can be to sit with a counselor who you trust and that you feel can work this out with you. Sometimes it's Father Evan or your priest. I think that they're also, to be honest, I think that was my last meeting, Father Evan said something to me and I was like, that was it. That was the thing that's been making this thing run for 33 years and you just found it. Father Evan is very capable, and there are many other priests that are capable too. So I would say, having others who can just see on the outside some of this dynamic can be really helpful, because they're just someone who's just familiar with the dynamic. It's not necessarily that they have to know what you ate for lunch and know so much about you. It's just that they kind of hear the story and they go, that sounds like that dynamic. Is that right or wrong? It could totally be wrong, right? But to sit with someone who can hear this pretty quickly is helpful. It can be very helpful. But then also, I think recognizing in your support system the people that know you really well. I'm sure all of you know at least one person who speaks in pretty good discernment. Is just a friend, and recognizing the value of that too is very valuable. Just people who can see a little bit on the outside of something. and go, it feels like you're needing something in this. What is it you're needing, you know? Yes.
Is it, do we have like sort of a list of sort of maybe healthy, valid core needs and maybe like unhealthy sort of kind of core needs that like maybe you know,
Yeah.
could be re-envisioned in the light of like, so like maybe an unhealthy core need has a counterpart in a healthy way, that,
Yeah.
or something like that. Do we have some kind of a chart?
Yeah, you
Or
know
graph?
what's interesting, and the research I was doing, I couldn't find like anything that had been listed out like that, so it's something I'm actually, I mean, I'm gonna keep looking into it, but I also wanna, there, in the book even, she doesn't like have like a nice clean, I really wanted a nice clean, like, here's a argument, here's a grenade, like, that's great. I'm gonna find it, and so I'm gonna like make it, so I didn't make it for this in time, so I apologize.
How about
But it-
next week?
What?
Can we get it by next week?
Yeah, you know what I'll do is I can email that out, like, because I do want to put it together, and if you guys are okay with that, getting an email sent out to you all, if you're registered, if you're not, just get us your email, because I do think, what I have also in my office that is established is like negative beliefs, right, that we recognize a counter-positive belief in a situation. But this stuff I've been kind of dabbling in this a bit newer as far as the subconscious commitment and the core need. I just thought it was really valuable. I wanted to bring it to you today. But I will send out in an email a bit of a list, and it'll just be made by me, so it's not, you know, it's not like some author at a book did this whole list, but I'm going off of this book that I've enjoyed. And Carl Jung is somebody who the author was inspired by. So I was looking into his work too to see if he had any very concrete lists, and I just couldn't find any. So they might be out there also, and I just could not find it. So it's a very good question, because I do think if we can identify what some of these core commitments are in our life, right? And it really is, you know, what she says in that piece in the back about, in that back slide, let's see, where'd it go? Oh, I guess it's not there. But the slide that I did have had said something along the lines of, when you recognize that your core commitment is showing up in every interaction you have with them, that's really helpful. It's like, oh, every time I engage, I'm committed to, I need this, I'm committed to this thing. And that can kind of help to kind of go, okay, it's playing out in a myriad of ways, but so it does take some work to kind of recognize for yourself what that is. But yes, I will email just a little list. I'll make one.
It doesn't
That's a
have
good
to be.
idea. Yeah, yeah. We're almost out of time. I'm gonna get through this, because this is also a very important piece, right? This is the when you're in the conflict. So I just need to talk about taking breaks is actually very healthy. The only way it kind of gets a little unhealthy is when we're taking breaks to never again talk. That's not a break, that is absolute avoidance. So that's the only thing to be mindful of. We want to take breaks and we want to re-engage, right? If this is something that we're trying to work out, we're trying to get resolved. But if one party needs a break, we shouldn't take offense to that. We need to give a little bit of that, right? So taking breaks, fighting fair, right? So I encourage every couple to have boundaries in their fighting. So this is really important on the preventative side of things, to talk to the people close to you who you might often engage in conflict with. What are some boundaries, right? Like, I'm not gonna, use these words. I'm not gonna come after identity. How can we create a boundary in how we have conflict? Not threaten divorce, right? Those are really, really important, baseline boundaries that we need, so that when we engage in conflict, we know we're gonna fight fair. We're gonna fight fair, and the other person's not, even if we take a break, we're not leaving, and we're not having these big, dramatic, I'm gonna divorce you every single time we get into the conflict. That's really not healthy, really not healthy. So just talking about what does that look like to engage in a way that stays respectful. Repair attempts, I love that concept. This is John Gottman. Finding a little bit of a way to lighten the mood, especially, if it's someone that you love and care about. How can we kind of not take ourselves so seriously? Like, we can feel it escalating. Are there, any inside jokes, we can have? And of course, we want to be careful, like humor, ill-timed humor might not go over well, and so we need to be aware of that, right? Sometimes the joke is like, "Woo, that was a bad time." But if you know the person well enough, and you can get a little bit of that tension release on it, right, within a repair attempt when you're trying to talk about something hard. The classic I statement rule, right, that was brought up. So talking about how you experienced the situation. So you came in and your eyebrows were raised, and I felt like you disapproved of me immediately, right? And you said, you know, the physical act of they had their eyebrows raised. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that. So you're just saying, I took that as you completely disapproved of how I handled that, right? But that allows us to have the conversation to say, this is how I experienced it. It might not be true. It might not be where you were at in it. Always something to apologize for, right? So that's what I was talking about at first, right? Always engaging as a Christian in the pursuit of friendship with every relationship. How can I own something in this? Then if you guys know the 7 principles of making a marriage work, they talk about these things as well. Harsh startup. So if you're going into a conflict and you already feel like the problem's not me, it's you, don't engage, step back. I mean, you can engage eventually, but work that out first, right? If you're coming into a conflict going, man, they are the problem here, like, that's not okay. 4 horsemen, the criticism and contempt. So it's really good to recognize feedback is like, hey, I've asked you to take out the garbage. It hasn't gotten done. I keep asking you again, it's not getting done. Like, there's feedback here of like, this is the reality of what's happening, right? We can talk honestly with each other. But what we don't want to have the conversation around that is, you never listen. You are lazy, you are selfish, right? We took the incident of not taking the trash out to this other place of like criticism and contempt that says your identity is the problem. You are just lazy. You are just this, right? That there's not a lot to work with in conflict when we just attack and we kind of go for the jugular. We want to try to keep the conflict about the actual situation. And that can be hard when I sit with people who've been married for 15 years and the garbage hasn't been taken out for 15 years. I get it. Like, they want to, like, this means that they are, you know, it's like, we still got to try to stay camped out in this other place to protect the relationship, right? Because that's what this is about. We're trying to protect the relationship. Flooding, so recognizing just that these things are unproductive. If you're flooded, you're feeling high distress. I use that 0 to 10 scale all the time. 10 being flooded, 0 like you could take a nap. Check in with yourself. Where am I? Should I engage with this conflict because I'm at a 7 right now in my body? Probably not. I probably need to bring that down a little bit before I engage, right? Okay, so the preventative thing as well. Talk with each other first how you would like conflict to go. If this is someone that you engage in conflict with frequently, right? I love when people get to collaborate. Like, what's our game plan for conflict? Because it's not if, it's when, right? When is it going to happen? This is more for people, housemates, right? People we're living with day in and day out, right? So having a good game plan that you both feel, and then try it on, and sometimes it won't work, and then come back together, you know, and talk it through. What worked, what didn't. Okay, this is where I was going to talk, you know, on the abusive relationships. This is where, and this is really difficult. This is where, you know, someone's narrative is that they don't break the trust, love, and respect. It's never them. They always deserve to be in that middle, and they've never done anything to deserve to be out of it, and they're convinced of that, and you, on your side, feel very, very hurt that they have broken trust, that they're not loving, they've been disrespectful, and the two narratives are just like at war in the sense of like the reality of what's actually happened. So that's something I can't really get into very much today, but if you believe that you're always the only problem in the dynamic, you feel crazy, you constantly guess how things went down, like you know how it went down and then they tell you it didn't go that way, that is a big sign that like they're really controlling the narrative. If you completely doubt your perspective on like, I ate cereal for breakfast, and they're like, no, you didn't, you had French toast, and you're like, maybe I did. Like, that is a silly example, but truly, it can get into your head to that point that you really do, you question your lived experience of some things. And so that, again, this is just a flag of like, if that feels that way, that's just a flag to note, you know, that's not usually healthy. This is also, I know I'm like over time, so I need to stop. But this is where that goes, right? It's like if there's such a war with the narrative, right, and that somebody's always dominating their narrative and that, you know, your narrative is never right, it's never considered even, there's no two-way street. Just talking about sometimes cutting off contact, divorce is the healthiest. It's very rare though. This is like the last resort. This is not something that I jump to. I very, very much want to go, how can we get back into the center with each other? But I just had to put that in there because it's something, okay, so put in the meme guide. Friendship and practicing biblical love, right? So those verses, keep those verses close. Remember, that is the point of conflict, is to love each other in it. There's a purpose for it. God is in the conflict. Even if it doesn't feel like it, there's a reason that you're being brought into it. There's a reason you have a relationship with this person. There's a reason this person's your brother or sister. The rite of the mutual forgiveness is far from being just a ritual. It can be and often is a profoundly effective event that changes the lives of those who participate in it. So again, pursuing conflict in humility, right? And with the intent to repair the relationship and to love the other person. Christians' responsibility is to love. Conflict is for protecting the relationship, not your ego. Identify core commitments that you're enacting within the conflict. Can both parties help to support the core need, right, that lies underneath? Or do we need better boundaries if it feels like we can't establish, like, oh, this is actually what I need, and it's just not, we're not being able to engage in that together. Yeah. And then, let you take a picture, you did? Yes, Andrew?
What do you do if you're in potentially abusive relationship kind of situation with somebody that you probably should have put a little bit outside of the center circle, but didn't, and then has sort of done some of these abusive things that you can't really contradict and don't remember.
Yeah.
And then has subsequently put you outside of their circle.
Sure.
I don't know, maybe there's just no answer.
No, it can happen, when we try to set boundaries in those relationships, that it can be decided by the other party. They're wanting to set the boundary first, and they'll jump to it, and they'll put you out first. And I think to respect that, right? And I think also that would be something I'd want you to sit with your spiritual father to be able to talk through that, right with Father Evan, because there's probably too much there I can't go into right now, right, of what was done. But I think if you're aware that middle space wasn't honored, it sounds like it a little bit resolved itself, that they decided, to put you out of that, and you can kind of be out of it and try to be humble in it, even though it can be hard, it can hurt. But that, it could be where am I able to meet them, where I can engage with them, and if they don't want any engagement, just respect that for now. But I think in that point, checking your heart that you stay clear of malice and resentment and hate and bitterness and anger, right? I think that's the work we can still do when someone puts us far out, and to just go, how can I genuinely want mercy on this situation, on them, and God's heart for them, and how can I orient myself to mercy and love and compassion, even if we're not in contact right now.
And maybe the answer to this is no. If it's no, that's okay. Is any level of sort of reaching out, if somebody said they don't want to have communication with you, acceptable? Would writing a letter be non-confrontational enough to be sort of acceptable, or is the answer no, just don't do it?
That's a really tough one. I don't like to make answers out of that, because I'm not walking in your shoes, and I'm not going to be walking in your shoes 5 years from now when your decision has all of its implications. What I want to do is encourage you to sit and really think about your intention for writing a letter. What would that intent in your heart be, right? And is it disrespectful to their ask? Maybe so, and to sit with that. That would be something I would want you to sit with, and I'd want you to be able to sit with someone who you could talk through that with, because it might be the most honoring and respectful thing is to not engage in contact, if that's what they asked, right? But I think that's a very tough situation to figure that one out. So yeah, I would encourage you though, you can think through it. And again, always checking on the work you can do in your heart, that you genuinely want well for them, and to really keep yourself accountable to that person. That's always a work we can be doing, even when we're not able to engage with them directly, to pray for them, right? It says love your enemies and pray for them. And I think some of that, right, love is patient, love is kind, holds no records of wrongs. I think the patience part sometimes, right? I don't know, but that's just some thoughts about that initially. It's tough. It's a tough one. I wouldn't want to give answers right away to it. Andrew, you have your hand up.
One thing that was really helpful for me, and it's a bit of a Gottmanism, I think, but also Dr. Mamalakis hammers this a lot, is in any conflict there are kind of three major options, or big umbrella categories. The decision to turn toward, turn away, or turn against someone. And a lot of what I feel like this example or any of the others is that what does turning toward look like? Because the first one is constructive and it cultivates the relationship, and the other two are destructive, right?
Yes, right. And that's totally the thing, right? My encouragement is we're always pursuing every relationship or turning towards every relationship on some capacity in friendship, right? In biblical friendship of love. So that's really good and a good way to think about it. So if respecting the no contact potentially is what you decide is most loving, if that feels like it's the right thing to do, to still pursue prayer for them and a clear heart for them, right? A soft heart for them. That if they called you tomorrow, moment's notice, your heart would be prepared for that, right? Is that fair? There's still a way we can turn towards, even if they're demanding we are talking to them. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, David.
I have one more follow-up question. Actually.
Yeah.
So if somebody's like accusing you of something that you're pretty sure you also didn't do.
Yeah.
Do you say that or not say that?
Yeah, that's a tough one when it's warring with your experience of like what the reality of what you're pretty sure happened. I think, it is good to acknowledge how they perceived it, because clearly there was something that happened that offended them. But I wouldn't advise someone to not be honest. So if genuinely you can't remember it, and you go, I'm really, really sorry because I don't remember doing that, but that breaks my heart that you would have thought you experienced that from me. That's never something I'd want you to experience from me, right? To still engage of like, that breaks my heart that you are remembering feeling this way from me. I don't want that. That hurts my heart. But I also can't in good conscience say that I remember doing that. And that might be hard for them to grapple with. That might offend them and it may be upsetting for them. But I think to have the conversation and stay honest in it, and we're not doing it out of a way to avoid, owning it, right? We have just, as long as we check our intent with that, of like, I really want to own what I can here. And if I do remember doing this, I need to own it. And if I don't, I still can come with humility and apologize for what's going on here. That's so heartbreaking. But also staying honest. I would always say staying honest is, yeah. I hope this was helpful today. Sorry we went over time.